Welcome to the Rimworld mod rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from vanilla Helixien Gas Expanded. For starters, you'll need to own the additional workshop content, vanilla expanded framework, and harmony. Whilst not required, this mod benefits from also adding Helixien Gas Brazier if you use royalty, and Helixien Gas Production if you use vanilla Furniture Expanded Production. It also has functionality with vanilla Furniture Expanded Power. All of these mods additions to Helixien Gas will be covered in this rundown. Alright, one of my all-time favourite mods. It isn't flashy or crazy heavy on mechanics, it just gives a solid alternative to powering your whole base via electricity every single run, which, if you played Rimworld for as long as I have, goes a long way in breaking up the standard flowchart of start new run, do A, then do B, once B is done, begin researching C, etc, etc. Helixien Gas itself is the new resource added in the mod, and it functions exactly like electricity. It has its own pump, pipeline, storage, and structures that can use it to function. Its base functionality is unlocked via the research, gas extraction, and any structures that can use gas as a resource will be unlocked with corresponding research, like smithing or biofuel refining. The obvious question is, why make a whole new resource if it does the same thing? For starters, gas-powered structures have the huge bonus of being immune to solar flares. This means that with the structures included, you can potentially avoid losing the lighting, production, and temperature regulation effects in your base whilst a solar flare is active. Super useful. Helixien Production also has some interesting interactions with ideological buffs or debuffs, as it stands apart from manual or powered crafting. This means if you're using something like Alpha Memes, which has choices like progressive and artistic, that can increase or decrease automation efficiency and crafting speed, Helixien Gas isn't considered manual or electric, so it'll ignore these changes. If you wanted to take Artist, you can use a gas-powered stove to make meals at a reasonable pace without needing to keep a pile of logs beside the Arga at all times. That's a few nice interactions for starters. It also works on a slightly different curve for efficiency and usage. We're going to get a little nerdy for a second, so get ready for some numbers. We'll cover the structures after this. A standard gas extractor is going to produce 7,200 litres of gas a day. With a gas light consuming 24 litres a day, this means you could run 300 lamps per extractor. If you were instead to dump all of that gas into a Helixien generator, which converts gas into electricity, you'd have 12,000 watts of power, which is enough to power 400 electric lamps, or twice that if you've got advanced lighting researched. Even further, if you instead put the gas into an advanced Helixien generator, that would make it produce 14,400 watts of power, which is enough for 480 electric lamps, or 960 with the advanced research. So, Fox, what's the point of all of these numbers? We both know that nobody's putting almost 1,000 lamps in their colony. It's to show that not all things are created equally. Helixien Gas can be used to light your bases, but it'll do a poor job of it compared to normal electricity. However, gas will do a fantastic job with things like heating and cooling, as it avoids solar flares, not to mention that any production benches that use Helixien Gas consume nothing whilst they aren't in use, meaning you can easily fill a bunch of storage tanks and have a base that's technically running at max capacity, consuming more than it actually produces, knowing that it's very unlikely for your base to run at this max consumption 24/7, allowing time for the tanks to refill during off hours. Okay, nerding out's over, let's talk structures. I'll throw a thumbnail up in the top left if the structure being mentioned comes from an additional mod. Firstly, you've got the pump. By default, in the mod settings you have 3 infinite geysers present on the map, think of them like a geothermal vent, and you'll also have underground gas deposits present which you'll need to have uncovered with a ground penetrating scanner. If you get lucky with the layout of the underground gas tiles, you might be able to squeeze 2 Helixien pumps on top of them for a double output. Just like all VE systems that use pipelines, you have standard pipes, subterranean pipes which will hide the graphic, valves to control flow, and tanks to store the resource. If you've not used an alternative pipeline system before, think of the Helixien pump like your electricity generator, a solar panel perhaps. The pipes are your conduits, valves are switches, and tanks are batteries. The only difference with pipeline networks compared to electricity is that pipelines don't use a little black wire to connect over a small distance. they need to be plugged right into the structure to function. As a quick word of advice, plumb in your tanks and pipelines before placing the Helixien pump. A few mods that try and aid with game performance have some odd conflicts and will stop your pump from working correctly if it isn't immediately connected to a tank. If you have a pump that reads 0 out of 0 gas in the network, you'll need to rebuild it once it's correctly hooked up to the pipelines to trigger it to work as intended. You have basic lighting covered with Helixien gas, including normal lamps, wall lamps, sun lamps, and outdoor floodlights. If you run pipes and cables through walls, like I normally do, you may notice when placing wall lights that Helixien gas structures actually replace pipelines they're built on top of. So if you decide you want to move a wall light, make sure that you rebuild the pipe on the tile it was originally on, or you might risk disconnecting your entire base from the supply. With the brazier mod, you have the option of normal and dark light braziers, which let you either light and heat rooms in one handy structure, or provide the features needed for throne rooms and the like to keep your royals happy. Whilst not a huge addition, it does make for a far more sustainable choice in your royalty buildings. You'll have access to a standard gas-powered generator, and with VE power, an industrial gas-powered generator. Both of these convert gas into electricity, so if you aren't a fan of gas production buildings or hate running multiple layers of pipeline through your base, you can still make use of Helixien by simply converting it over to normal electricity and having it aid in powering your base. As to the difference between normal and industrial generators, the normal consumes 600 litres a day and produces 1000 watts, with a tile size of 2x2. The industrial consumes 1800 litres a day and produces 3600 watts, the same as a geothermal, with a size of 3x3. So you get slightly more efficient power output at the cost of the generator taking a little bit more space by itself. Bear in mind you'd need 4 normal generators to beat its output, which would make it take 4x4, so if you can do industrial generators, do them. Then you've got your production buildings, a crematorium, a smelter, a stove, a smithy, a refinery. If the process needs heat or fire, Helixien can do it basically. Now, whilst none of these buildings compare remotely in terms of efficiency to their electric counterparts, you need to consider how often these buildings will be in use and how much downtime they'll have, sat consuming absolutely nothing. The refinery, for example, takes 1200 litres a day when working, compared to the tiny 170 watts of an electric refinery. But is that really a major concern when it's being used at most once a week to top up your chem fuel? The main part you'll want production for is the stove, as the standard electric version is a thirsty bitch, and gas makes the most sense for cooking. If you have vanilla expanded production installed, you also get the large versions of both the smithy and the stove too, which doubles their consumption but provides a 150% base work speed. Sure, you could do more with 2 standard workbenches, but then you also need 2 pawns working on them. This is a pretty nice upgrade if you don't have an absolutely huge colony with a lot of skill crossover. You've got heaters and coolers, with heaters being insanely energy efficient compared to their electric counterparts, and coolers making walk-in freezers an absolute breeze to construct. Whilst you have no control over the temperature range when using a gas cooler, they also don't require space to vent the heat that they're displacing, so they always aim for a steady -5 in the room that they're placed and will quite happily keep it that way from the first day you place them until the day the colony dies. The final structure is a gas-powered pod launcher, which works exactly like a standard pod launcher without any of the need for legwork when refueling, and it uses a much cheaper fuel source. Just be aware that because pod launchers take a bite out of any stored gas once used, if you fire off a large amount of pods at once and don't have many tanks, you'll likely find that these can totally drain your storage in the blink of an eye. And there we have it, Helixien gas, for all of your production, temperature regulation and run diversifying needs. Obviously worth mentioning that gas is extremely flammable, so you want to keep these tanks away from danger. Or put them right next to danger if that's your jam. The more gas stored inside these leads to a larger explosion. I mean, in a weird way, it is a very cheap fire-based defensive option. Only 100 steel needed per tank. Thanks for watching, folks. If you have any mods you'd like to see a full breakdown for, or suggestions of mods you'd like to see covered, feel free to leave them in the comments. I might get around to them. I'll be back again soon with another Rimworld mod rundown. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. Take care.